Tell us your full name.
Glen Robert Morgan.
And your date of birth?
November the 8th, 1931.
Okay. And where were you born?
I'm not sure if I was born in Polk County or I was born somewhere out in that area, but I'm not sure if it was in Polk County. I don't think it was Greenville County. I think it was in Polk County.
Were
But
you born at home?
I was born at home.
Home. Where were you living? Where were you born? Do you know what road you were living on when you were born?
It was over on the Mine Mountain section, but I don't know the house and the place where it was. It was over in that area is all I can say for sure.
And tell us where you live now.
I live over on Old Mountain Page Road, 528 Old Mountain Page Road. I've been living over there since about I had the little old house several years before I moved over there, and I moved over there in '81. I've lived there since then.
Do you want to tell us your spouse's name? Now, you want to tell us your first wife and what happened? And
My first wife was Jewel, and we was living in Charlotte, and my son was 3 years old, and she was having trouble, and the doctors couldn't seem to find out what was wrong with her, and they put her in the hospital, and she didn't live but about a week. And when she passed on, they done an autopsy and said she had ulcerated colitis. And my son was only 3 years old at the time, so I worked on about another year where I was working and put my son in the nursery. And I was having a hard time getting off from work in time to pick him up. But anyway, I worked on about a year, and I didn't know many people in Charlotte since I hadn't lived there and didn't have any family there. So I decided the best thing for me to do would be move back here where I had family and friends to help me take care of him. So I did that, and
your son's name?
My son's name is Glen Robert Jr., but he goes by Bob. And my first wife's last name was Jewel Deadman. I just said Jewel Deadman. And about 10 years later, I married Laura Kitchen. And we've been married about 33 years now. She had a daughter about the same age as my son. And I didn't ever adopt her, and Laura didn't adopt my son. But we treated each one of them as their own child. And if we introduced them, we didn't say this is my stepdaughter or my stepson. We just said this is our son or this is our daughter. And it all worked out good, because I always felt like if I introduced my stepdaughter as a stepdaughter, she'd think, well, he don't think as much of me. Or if my wife introduced my son, say my stepson, I just had a feeling that the child would think it wouldn't go over as good. So I think it worked out best, and they're both in their 40s now and both married and have children.
Would you tell us your parents' name?
My daddy's name was Monroe Morgan, and my mother's name was Angie Russell Morgan.
And they were Saluda people.
They were both born and raised here in the Saluda area.
So you're a native of Saluda. You left and then you came back.
That's correct.
You grew up in Saluda. You went to Saluda schools.
That's correct.
And you graduated from high school here.
No, I'll have to tell you a little sad story about that. When I was in 10th 10th grade, about at the end of the school, I got to thinking I want to get a job and get me a car. So I was looking for a reason to quit school. And one day at school, I don't know what I'd done, but anyway, the teacher kind of made me mad. So I come home and told my mom and dad, I said, I'm quitting school, get a job and get a car. And they tried to talk me out of it. They said, you got plenty of time to get a job and get a car. You need to go ahead and finish school. But I didn't listen. I went ahead and quit school, got a job, got me a car. And it was after my son was about 5 years old, I went to Blue Ridge Tech and got my GED. And the main reason I did that, I felt like I needed to set an example for my son, because if he got in the 10th, 11th grade and decided he wanted to quit school, what could I say? So I mostly did it for him, and he went on to school and even went to college. Whether that had anything to do with it or not, I don't know, but I'm glad I did that, because you need to set an example for your children.
And you came back to Saluda because you had family here.
Yes.
Did you get the support you needed to take
I
care of
did. My sister helped me quite a bit, one of my sisters, and my mom and dad was able to help, so yeah, I had help, and it all worked out.
Let's talk about your memories of growing up in Saluda area. What was your first job?
My first job was hoeing corn for my great uncle Luther Morgan. He paid me 10 cents an hour. I guess I was about 12 years old. And I hated to hoe corn worse than anything I ever done. But I was glad to make a little bit of money and save a little bit of money. And when I go to town, I could get some candy or something. And later on, when I got a little older, I started picking apples for Kenneth Pace when apple picking season was in. Made a little money. And then in the summertime, a man by the name of Levi Pace, that lived over on Trammell Gap Road, he hauled hands down to Inman, South Carolina to pick peaches. So when I was 14, I said, well, I'm going to go pick peaches this summer and make me some money and buy me a bicycle. I went down and they said, you're too young to pick peaches, we'll let you be water boy. You can carry water to the hands picking peaches. So I did. I don't remember what little money I made, but I saved every penny of it, bought me a used bicycle, and I was proud of it if it'd been a Cadillac. So the next summer, I picked peaches again, and I got to pick that year. I was old enough to pick, made a little bit more money. So I saved my money and bought me a new bicycle. And I was proud of it, I guess, if it was a Rolls Royce. But anyway, when you work for anything and earn it, it means more to you.
Is there any of the older people in Saluda that affected your life?
Well, I'd say the people at the church, when I went to church, that, they'd encourage you to do stuff, and that meant something to me. And my mom and dad, they never did go into too much detail, but they taught us right from wrong. And we knowed what was right and wrong. I didn't always do right like a lot of other kids, but I knowed better. If kids is not taught right from wrong, they don't know better. And I think there's some kids grow up now that's not even taught right from wrong, and they don't even know what's right and what's wrong.
You remember the train, I'm sure.
Yes.
In the Saluda.
Yes.
Did you ever ride the train?
I've rode the train from Saluda to Hendersonville a time or two, and I guess that's all the train riding I ever did here. And I went up toward Burnsville and rode the train, just a joyride since then. But the regular old train was just from here to Hendersonville two or three times.
Most of the people, if they didn't ride the train, they rode the bus, because
Yeah.
the bus came through several
Yes,
times a day.
right.
So if you had a car, you didn't have to.
I didn't hardly go nowhere besides go to church till I got a car. And I was 17 when I got my first car, so then I was able to drive to Hendersonville and go to the movie. And there were several little eating joints up there, drive-in eating joints. You went in and they'd bring you food out on a tray and hang it on your window. And that was my favorite thing to do in my younger years growing up. I'd go to Hendersonville almost every night and go to the drive-in, and I could go to one and park, and people that I learned to know, they'd come by and stop and talk to you, so you get to meet about everybody you knew. And I'd ride up and down Main Street just to see what was going on. And then the Main Street was just straight up there. There wasn't all these things. And when I was young and wild, why, I'd drag race on Main Street. And lucky I didn't ever get caught for drag racing on Main Street. I got stopped one time for loud mufflers on a car. I thought at the time a car had glass pack or loud mufflers. I just liked the sound of it. So the old policeman gave me 3 days to get my mufflers changed. And later on in my driving, I was still pretty wild after I got an Oldsmobile, and I got caught for speeding on 176 up there about where Reynolds Shoe Store used to be. And they had tubes across the road. That's the way they clocked your speed at that time. And speed limit up through there, I think, was 55. They clocked me at 90 miles an hour. And I got almost to Hendersonville before the patrolman stopped me, and he said, "Are you trying to kill somebody?" And I said, "No, why?" He said, "Well, the way you come up this road, you was driving like it." So he wrote me up for speeding. Well, the next Saturday night, I'd been to a square dance over here, and after the dance was over, I thought I had to go to Hendersonville and see who's up there. So I was driving too fast out 176, and I had an accident out there. I wrecked my car, and patrolman come down. He wrote me up for reckless driving, which I was guilty. I tried to go around the curve. Anyway, when it come time to go to trial, I got a lawyer because I pretty well knew they was going to get my driver's license. And it was probably 2 or 3 months before my trial come up. And I was working in Adam Millis, so I'd save my money to, hopefully I'd have enough to get out of my trouble. But afraid I didn't have enough, so when it come time to go to court, I went to my daddy and asked him would he loan me $75. And he said, "I'm gonna loan you this money, and I want you to get out of trouble and stay out of trouble." I went to court by myself, none of my family went. I got into it and got out. Well, the lawyer first is gonna get my driver's license for a year and so much fine. My lawyer said, "I think we can do a little better if we carry it on up to the next higher court." So they postponed it 2 or 3 weeks or a month and carried it up to the next court. So then they got my driver's license for 6 months, and I paid a fine. And when I got ready to drive home, since I was up there by myself, I asked them at the clerk of court there, I said, "I'm up here by myself, can I drive my car home?" They said, "No, your time starts right now." But me being young and wild, I thought, I am going to drive my car home. So I got in the car and I drove home. I drove the speed limit. I watched my mirrors in case anybody got after me. I guess if they'd got after me, I might have thought I could outrun them again. I don't know. But anyway, lucky I got home and didn't get caught. So I wasn't able to drive for 6 months in North Carolina. Had a sister that lived in Landrum, South Carolina at the time. And I was working in Tryon in the hosiery mill. So I went to South Carolina and got South Carolina driver's license, took my car down there, and I could drive in South Carolina. And there was a neighbor of hers that worked at Adam Millis, so I got a ride with him to work and back. But of evening, I was working third shift, and of evening I'd get up and I'd ride off down towards Spartanburg just to be able to drive my car. Not that I knowed anybody down there, but just to be able to drive.
Tell us that story you said earlier about your tires. wore your tires out and Raymond Stevenson said?
Yeah, I was, when I had this 49 Oldsmobile, I traded with Raymond Stevenson, bought all my gas there and had my oil changed. And I needed a set of tires, so I bought a new set of Atlas tires. And they were guaranteed, I forgot how long they were guaranteed, but they were guaranteed. 33 days later, from driving up and down 176 every night to work, I went around all the curves sideways. Lucky I didn't get killed or run over somebody. 33 days later, my tires were slick, so I come back to Raymond and told him I need my tires adjusted. He looked at them and said, I'm going to adjust these tires, but said these won't be guaranteed. So that told me I need to slow down, take a little better care of my tires.
How long did that set last?
I don't remember, but much longer.
Much longer. Well, you were talking about 176. I remember my father talking about Dead Man's Curve. Is there such a thing as Dead Man's Curve?
That's going here between here and Hendersonville. The sharp curve when you get on out, after you go over the old bridge out here, where the old bridge is, you go on up over the hill and go around the curve, and go down to the foot of the hill where that curve's real sharp.
Yeah.
That's what they used to call Dead Man's Curve.
Was it worse back then than it is now? Or is it still pretty bad considered?
It was probably about the same curve, but there was no guardrail for many, many years.
Okay.
And there was 2 or 3 cars that run off down in there.
And people got killed.
Yeah. In fact, one of the Saluda policemen was chasing a car down there that run off down in there one time. And
The policeman ran off in there, or the car he was chasing?
the car he was chasing run off in there.
Boy got killed, didn't he?
I think the boy or man got killed. I never did know exactly who he was, but anyway, I was glad when they put a guardrail up. Of course, I'd straightened up and quit driving wild at that time. But it really needed a guardrail there, even for people that was driving right.
Yeah.
That's just past the quarry.
Yeah, I wondered if that was it. I just remember Daddy talking about that was always a really bad place on the road.
Yes.
Glenn, you said you had several jobs. Did you ever work for any of the summer people?
My daddy done yard work for some of these people, and there was a lady, I don't remember the name of the street out there. You turn up where Bo Phillips lived, by the name of Miss Ravenel. And I helped my daddy do a little yard work up there. And another place or two he done work, I helped a little bit. Then there's a lady lived over near the nursing home, Miss Marydale Johnson. My daddy kept up her place. She lived in Florida, and she'd come up in the summertime and spend time here. So my daddy in the wintertime, he'd go over and pick up dead limbs and do the trimming and stuff, and I'd help him do that. And in the summertime, he'd set out her flowers, dahlias, and different stuff. And I'd help do that. So Miss Marydale, she lived to be about 100 years old when she passed away. But I worked for her some even after my dad quit working over there, just mowing little grass and doing a little yard work. And she was a real good lady to work for. She'd bring me a Coca-Cola out there and tell me to take a break and sit down and rest when I wasn't even tired.
About 4 foot high, wasn't she?
Yeah, a little short lady, real sweet lady.
Now did she run an inn, or was this her private home?
Just private home, just private home.
Did the Saluda folks mingle a lot with the summer folks, or y'all kind of lived a separate existence?
I guess we kind of lived separate. I guess most of the summer folks, country folks sort of worked for them and all, but that was the biggest thing. I don't guess they socialized or anything much together.
Some of them brought their own maids with them,
Yes.
and they would hire the local people to do the yard work a lot.
That was most of the outside work that mostly they hired the people for. They might have hired somebody, but like you said, most of them brought their maid with them to do their housework.
And the summer people socialized among themselves, because this week party is at your house, next week is at mine, and so when they went all the way around the community, everybody had a party just about it, didn't they?
Yeah, it was. That's the way it worked.
Were you all glad to see the summer people come back, or were you kind of like, oh no, here they come?
I was glad to see them because it helped me get a little job. So,
Help the economy.
And like I say, especially ones that's real nice to work for, you just enjoyed working for them too, plus making a little money. And most of them was pretty nice.
We know that Saluda is really unique and special. So what's your thoughts about Saluda?
Well, since I've retired, and some before I retired, me and Laura's been to several countries. I've been to Australia and New Zealand and a lot of foreign countries. I guess I've been to probably a dozen different ones, and I love to go and see, but I was always glad to get back home, see these old Saluda mountains. And Saluda's just a unique place to grow up. There wasn't much going on, and wasn't a whole lot to do, but anyway, it was a good place to grow up.
Do you remember any particular interesting characters around Saluda when you were growing up? Like some people like to talk about the Wards, or Charlie Ward and his dad, and some people like to talk about what?
The policeman?
Or Phoebe Sullivan, or what's Isaac Means, or what's the fellow's name with the peg-leg?
The barber.
The barber.
Will Forrest.
Will Forrest, yeah.
He used to cut my hair, and he used an old straight razor after he cut your hair to trim your sideburns and your neck a little bit. And his hand would just shake like that till he got to your face, and then it was after he touched your face. But it's kind of scary because he looked like he just might be going. I guess he's just, I don't know, just his nerves or what, but he was sort of shaky with that old straight razor till he got to your face. But he cut my hair for many years, and he was always had some old tales to tell. And I remember telling one time about somebody had some ducks and said somebody run over my ducks and said they killed all but one. And they said, well, how many ducks did he have? He said he had 2. So that meant he just run over one. But he made it sound like he run over a flock of them, said killed all my ducks but one. Yeah, how many ducks did he have? He had 2.
Now, where was his barbershop at?
You know where Shedley's jewelry place is there on Main Street now? Right above Ward's Thompson store.
Was he up there?
Huh?
Did he have a barbershop in Hendersonville too?
No, it's just in Saluda. You're talking about Will Forrest, the barber?
Yeah.
No, he just had a barbershop in Saluda.
Now is that you're talking about around in the back? Aren't they?
No, it's right on the very front.
Oh, okay.
I think it's just about 1 or 2 doors up where Thompson's store is,
Oh, okay.
up toward the police station there. That's where the barbershop was.
Do you remember any of the old town policemen?
I remember Fred Morris, he was one, and Mr. Harv Grummels was another one. And
Lauder?
Doc Wilson, the new Gurley Lauder. I guess that's about the oldest ones. I guess Fred Morris was the one that was more strict on people, and that's at the time I was driving kind of wild. And I remember one time he stopped me I took off from an old Guff station out here and spun the wheels and started up Greenville Street. When I left the Guff station, I seen he wasn't sitting in front of the police station, so I figured that was a good chance to spin my wheels, so I did. When I crossed the railroad and started up there where the pavilion is now, he was parked up there. So he throwed the spotlight on me as I stopped, and he really chewed me out. But he didn't write me a ticket. He just said, you think you have to spin the wheels every time you take off? And I said no, but in my mind, I guess I thought I did, because I did it so much. But anyway, he just gave me a good talking to, and he said, if I have to ever stop you again, I said, I'm going to do everything I can to get your driver's license. So I pretty well respected him from then on, as long as he was here, because I pretty well knew he meant what he said, and I didn't want to lose my license.
I think he was the first one that came in after Gurley retired. But
I think he was. And Doc easy to get along with, easy going, and you could get away with a little more with him.
Well, we talked about some of the things and what did you do for fun?
Mostly just going to Hendersonville at night and going to the drive-ins and go to the movies. There was 2 movies on Main Street and 2 drive-in theaters in Hendersonville, so went to the movies a good bit and
Did you go to the square dances in Saluda?
go to the square dances about I think they had them on Friday night part of the time, and then later they might have changed them to Saturday night. Yeah, I went to a lot of the square dances. It was another thing I enjoyed doing while I was young.
So you actually learned the steps in square dance?
I thought I did. As long as I was out there and had a girl to dance with, I was happy. I didn't.
Even if you had to fake it, huh?
never did learn to do much dancing, but I enjoyed trying.
Tell us what kind of work you did mostly in your life.
After I growed up, got old enough to get a real job, I worked at Adam Millis hosiery mill, made nylon hose for women. Got paid by production. If your machine run good, you could make, even back in about the early 50s, you could make about $100 a week back then. That was big money. And I didn't try to save no money. All I wanted was a nice car and enough money to loaf around and have a good time. So that's what I did for a good many years. Long up in the later 50s, the mill, they started making one-man run 2 machines. And you couldn't really keep 2 machines going all the time. So the Saluda hosiery mill was here in Saluda, so I went up there and talked to Mr. Homer Taylor, and he gave me a job up there. And they were still one man run one machine, which was good. And I worked there till it closed. I don't know, probably a couple of years later, the hosiery business just went out, closed. After then,
The fire department is now.
yeah, after that mill closed, I went to the Ford place in Henderson. Well, before I went to the Ford place, there's a place called Ralph Stokes down on the lower end of town, and he had the Plymouth dealer at the time. So I worked in the parts department there. Didn't have nobody teach me how to do parts, but I done the best I could. So I worked there about a year, and then the Ford place they was out on the Asheville Highway. It was Garrett Ford at the time. So I went out there and applied for a job, and they hired me. And they had a good parts manager that knowed how to parts. He taught me how to read. Back then, you looked up your parts out of a book. You didn't do it on computer. You looked up what kind of car it was and learned how to read the book and know what parts to get for that particular car. So I worked there about 6 years. Then I transferred. I went to Greensboro. Went to work at this Ford truck outfit place, and I worked in shipping and receiving down there. And I got married right after I moved down there, and my wife was from Hendersonville, so we moved down there when I got married. And I worked there about 5 years. Then they bought a place in Charlotte, so I transferred to Charlotte because it was a little bit closer home. I'd come home every probably about once a month to visit my family and all. So I worked there. Like I say, my first wife passed away then, and I worked on another year after then. But with my 3-year-old son, I was having a hard time getting him out of the nursery by the time I got off from work. So I decided the best thing to do was come back home where I had family and friends, and I did, and it worked out good. So when I come back here, I went back to the Ford place. No, I went to the Boyd Pontiac first time and worked at Boyd Pontiac in the service department for about a year or a little more. And I wasn't pleased. Those people was pretty hard to please. And they asked me what I was going to do to get more business and different stuff. And I felt like it was their job to advertise and get more business. My job was to take care of the customers when they come in. But anyway, I was unhappy there. So I went to DuPont and applied for a job, hoping to get on up there. And they interviewed me and carried me inside, and 2 or 3 of the bosses said, "You're 90% of the way. I don't see why you won't get hired." Well, I went for my physical, and they turned me down. Said you need to go see your doctors. So they said I had a lower bundle branch block to my heart, and I could have been born that way, they said. But anyway, they wouldn't hire me. So I was real disappointed that I didn't get there. So anyway, then I went to the Ford place and got in the service department up there and worked a good many years. And then in about 1980, I went to 79 or 80, I went to Pardee Hospital and worked in the X-ray department. I transported patients and pulled folders from previous X-rays. And back then you mixed X-ray chemicals to develop your film. So I mixed the chemicals. I'd done that for 5 years. And I worked every other weekend. There's 2 of us doing this job. So then we got busier and they hired the 3rd man. And they'd come 3 weeks later, he didn't work. So I went to my boss and I said, "When's Mr. So-and-so's weekend to work?" He said, "Well, he won't be working no weekends." I said, "Well, here I've worked here 5 years, and me and this other man, and we worked every other weekend, and that was fair." I said, "Now I feel like it'd be fair to work every 3rd weekend." He said, "Well, he won't be working no weekends." So I thought, well, I don't know. I said, "Well, I don't know how many more weekends I'll be working." So I started looking for another job. Hendersonville Equipment Rental. Dick Williams opened it up down on 7th Avenue, rented out contractors' equipment. So I got a job there. In the last 12 and a half years, I worked there till I retired. After Dick, he owned it there for the first couple of years, then he turned it over to his stepson, Greg Albee. And Greg was a real good man to work for. So I worked till I was 65, and I told Greg, I was retired. And Greg was real good. He let me run the rental business, and he had a hauling and grading business. And if I had a question about the rental, he'd tell me whatever I thought was fair. And if somebody had trouble with the machine, why, I'd take her word for it and reduce their bill if they said this machine tore up or it broke or something happened. And I guess some people might have took advantage of it. But I wanted to treat people like I'd want to be treated myself. And when I got ready to retire, Greg said, "You can work another year or 2 if you want to." And I said, "Greg, I appreciate it, but it's time for me to go." And that was the end of my work. I was 65.
Do you have any special memories of your school years? A special teacher or somebody that you
I guess my 2 special teachers at school was my 1st grade teacher, Miss Hall. She was just so good to kids. Then the rest of the teachers were all okay, but the 5th grade, Miss Edwards, I think her name was Betty Edwards, I ain't sure, it was Miss Edwards. I guess she was my favorite teacher, and one year, she'd always have something for kids to do. So one year she said she wanted me to grow some tomato plants. So in the window in our room there, the sun shined there. So we got a container. I got some rich soil and brought in and planted tomato seeds, and I'd water them and take care of them. And when they got big enough to set out, well, I divided them up to everybody in school to take home in that grade to set out tomato plants. So she told me I was her farmer. In the end of the year, when it come time to pass, well, she had different kids doing different things, and she'd say, "Gonna keep me another year to grow tomato plants," and the other kid's gonna keep him for something else. But
made you feel special, didn't she?
But anyway, we passed, and it was just, she was just a real good teacher. She was one of my favorite teachers.
And both of those teachers taught for years at Saluda, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
We've had some unusual events that happened in Saluda. Do you remember any specific ones?
I guess one of the most ones I remember is when Austin Pace shot up the town down here. And he shot one of the policemen. I think he hit one of them. And he just started his first day. I don't remember his name, but he decided that wasn't for him, man. But yeah, he got over across the street shooting up the town. And that guy, he lived over on Mine Mountain over past there, and he went over there and hid, and I think they finally got him and arrested him maybe, but
What year was that? Around
Charlotte,
62, 63?
he was in the earlier 60s, I don't remember the date.
I believe it was 62.
But his mind wasn't real good, but along with that, he was just mean, and he's pretty bad to drink, and just didn't care, you know, he just...
So did he have a reason for doing it, or was he just...
out of meanness.
Had a mental problem. Do you remember the airplane that crashed over next to Mount Page? It was a small one, something, wasn't it?
That was in '66, and I think I'd already moved to Greensboro. No, that wasn't in '66. That was earlier. When I moved to Greensboro, the one that crashed up near Hendersonville, that was in '66, so I wasn't here when it crashed. I was here when the other one crashed, but I didn't go up there for some reason. I don't know why or why, but I was still living here. I don't know what, do you know what year that crashed when the Saluda?
I don't remember exactly, but I know it was over near the Gordons.
Yeah, it was
Into that
up and above where Henry Gordon lived, up in there, but I don't know what year it was.
You was not in the service, were you?
I was in the service for a shorter period of time. I went to Fort Jackson. First time they took me for a draft, I had asthma growing up and always had some breathing problems, so they turned me down. About 2 years later, they called me again, and I passed. So I went to Fort Jackson, and I took training for about 30-something days. And one day was out, it was in July, the hottest part of the year, and down Fort Jackson, well, you can imagine how hot it was. We had a full field pack on. It come up a rain, and I thought they'd let us put our ponchos on and stuff, but they didn't. They wouldn't let us do that. They wanted to make us tough, I guess. So the next morning I got up, I had a pretty bad...
Okay, we're up and rolling again. So go ahead with what you were telling us about.
Okay, after I fell out for sick call that morning because had a real bad cold. I went over there and they checked me and said, we're going to put you in the hospital. And I said, I don't want to go to the hospital because there's a couple of people from Saluda went in when I did, and then I got to know a few of the others, so I knew if I went in the hospital and got out, then I'd be in a different outfit. So I wanted to stay in the same outfit. So I tried to talk them out of putting me in the hospital, but said, no, you need to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and about 3 days later, they said, you got pneumonia. And I knew I was sick, but I didn't know I had pneumonia. So they kept me in the hospital a few more days, and old Dr. White come in there one day after they'd told me I had pneumonia, and he said, I'm going to put in for you a medical discharge. And I said, well, Doc, I ain't over here trying to get out of the Army. I said, I'm over here because I'm sick. But he said, well, I'm going to put in for you a medical discharge. And I said, well, I wouldn't mind being out, but I ain't doing nothing to try to get out. He kind of laughed. He said, sometimes I wouldn't mind being out myself. So he put in for me a medical discharge. 3 days later, I got out and come home. But I can honestly say, I didn't do anything to try to get out. I went in to serve my country.
And how long did you stay in?
I stayed in about a month and a half total.
So do you like to hunt or fish or do you hunt?
Back in my younger years, I used to do a little bit of rabbit hunting and squirrel hunting, even done some possum hunting and coon hunting. But after I got grown, about all I'd done, my brother had beagles, registered beagles, and run them in field trials. So I decided I'd get into that. So I bought me one beagle from him and run it in a field trial and won a ribbon. So then that made me feel good. So I went up the other side of Weaverville and bought me another registered beagle. And I don't think it got a ribbon. But then right away, my first beagle that had won the ribbon got poisoned. I was living at home with my dad at the time, Dad and Mom. So I got discouraged, and I was afraid my other beagle would get poisoned, so I just sold it, and that was the end of my beagles. So I don't reckon I've really done any hunting. I've done a little bit of fishing since then, but we went to Alaska one year on our vacation and went deep sea fishing, and we caught some halibut, and we had to pay pretty big money to go out, and on this big boat they furnished the poles and the bait and everything. I caught a halibut that weighed about, I think, 69 pounds. They had to help me get it in. It was so big. It was big enough when they got it in. They had a little old gun. They shot it because they said, if you get it up in the boat, fish that big flopping can hurt somebody. So they shot it. And my wife caught one. I think it weighed 72 pounds. So we had them dressed and told them when we'd be back home, and they said they'd ship it back home. So we got back home about a week later after we'd spent about a week up there. And we gave fish to the family and had fish to eat for a good many years, halibut fish. But that was my biggest fishing trip.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that you'd like to talk about the community club that's not in existence anymore.
No, I think Miss Eunice Skinner, she was married to Glen Holland at that time. In 1952, a group of them got together and built the club, and Eunice and her husband donated the land. And I didn't go to the community club much back then. I was young. But later on, Eunice's first husband died, and she married again, and she was Eunice Skinner. Then he died later, but she was head of it, and me and my wife, I guess in about the mid-'80s, we started attending regular, and mostly because of her. She wanted to keep a community club going, and they was really just a handful of us went over the good many years, but we'd go once a month and have a meal, and we'd talk about things we could do to try to help, and like I say, we'd rent the building out once in a while. Somebody was having a birthday party and raise a little bit of money. And like I say, we sold things at Coon Dog Day to do that. My son...
What were you raising money for?
Just to keep the community club up, to pay the light bill and insurance and stuff that you had to have to keep the building up.
I was going to say, where is the community building?
It's out on Mountain Page Road before you get to Mountain Page Church. It's on the opposite side of the road. I don't know if you know where Hilda Pace lives.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, it's right before you get to Hilda Pace. In fact, Miss Eunice was her mother, and she owns the building now, so I don't know. We've had some elections out there when it come time to vote over the years, and she let them vote out there again this year when they voted, and I don't know if she's going to continue that or not. But the community not used for community club anymore. But back in the early years, before I started attending all the time, on New Year's Eve they'd have singings out there. On New Year's Eve, Mr. Wade Pace, he'd lead the singings. I went to one, I think I remember of, but I was young, and singings wasn't something I really wanted to go to, but you know, it was something to do, and they had that for a good many years.
How many years do you think that operated?
As a singing...
The community club?
Well, from 1952 till 2012.
Oh, wow.
2012 was the last, I don't remember the date on 2012 was the last one.
The community club was actually still functioning in 2012?
Till in 2012, yes.
Glenn, you mentioned some of your family. Tell us about your siblings.
I had 5 sisters and 1 brother. I was a middle child. There's 7 of us total. I had 2 older sisters and an older brother than me. Then I had 3 younger sisters. And now there's only 3 of us left, me and 2 younger sisters. The rest of them have passed away.
Your brother was Roy?
My brother was Roy. My older sister was Alvarie. We called her Alvarie. Her name was Frances Alvarie Pace. And when she got a job, she went by Frances, but we always called her Alvarie. And my brother was Roy. And Elsie, my sister, just passed away a little over a month ago, was Elsie Pace.
And then three younger girls.
The youngest girl was Gary Ann. She passed away with cancer back in, I think it might have been, I can't remember what year she passed. Yeah. Then my mom and dad passed away in the 80s. My mom passed away in 84 and my dad passed away in 86.
And you have two sisters?
Two sisters living, Wilma Camel and Joyce Reed. They both live in East Flat Rock. And I live over on Old Mountain Page Road.
There's three of you left.
Three of us left.
Do you remember them building, do you live across the street from the cemetery?
Right across from the old church there, where the old cemetery is up on the hill. I live directly across the road there.
Now, do you remember when they built the church that's sitting there now? Because I know it was built like, what, in the 40s?
You know, the old wood church was up on the hill, and I vaguely remember it, and
So the old wooden church was still standing up there on the hill in the 30s? Because you were born in the 30s, right?
it was there, and I think it was probably in the 40s when they built some of the people from Mountain Page broke off and come over and they built the old Mountain Page church.
The one that's sitting, the cinder block.
One that's sitting there is sitting there now, and they hadn't been a service there in probably 35 years.
But was it built to be a church, or was it built to be for revivals or special?
No, it's built for a church, and they had a preacher that preached there, and I went to a few services over there. Then after they quit having services, once in a while they'd have a singing there after they quit having regular services. But it's been probably 35 years since they've had anything. Philip Morgan looks after that. He keeps it mowed around there, and he wants to leave the old church kind of like it was. And they did try to do a little repair on some of the windows, and some of them got broke again, I think. But and he keeps the cemetery mowed, and I don't know what he'll do. He don't even want to be buried there. He's got a brother that's buried up at Shepherd's that got killed in the Vietnam War, and I think he bought a plot to be buried up there. But I don't know who'll take care of the cemetery. When he first took it over, nobody had took care of it for a good many years, and it had trees growed up in it 6 or 8 inches thick, and he cleaned them all out, and now him and got a guy that helps him mow and stuff. So I admire Philip
That's my people buried up there.
for what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tell him thank you, that we appreciate.
Yeah.
That Dr. Jones tells us that land does not have a deed. Is that what the way?
Yes, it does. I researched the Paces, and they came here in 1808, and when they bought 200 acres of land over there, it said except that 2 acres that is Mountain Page Church, is the old meeting house church.
Right, but who actually has ownership of that? Because Dr. Jones says it belongs to all the Paces.
Well,
That's all I can ever-
that old deed, the first deed that the Paces had, said except that 2 acres that belongs to the old meeting house church.
So whoever had,
And it was established in 1789.
I think that's what the sign said.
something like that.
but it's really not clear as to who has ownership of that land. So
Well, look like since it was donated to that, I guess it's still legally donated to the old church and the cemetery.
But who actually owns the old church and the cemetery, though? See, that's what,
It's public domain.
It's
that's
never.
what he's talking about.
It's still, it was donated there, and I don't guess it's ever been sold to anybody since then. Philip just volunteers to take care of it. He don't own it, but he takes care of it. Like it was his, but I'd say he don't own it.
When Bud Pace was buried in 1939, they made some pictures of the grave, and you know, he's right at the front of the cemetery. And you could see the old church, the bottom of the church, standing in the background. I think the old church had already fallen down, but then after he died, they went and built the new church down there.
Yeah.
Some years, about
Right.
1940.
Yeah. It operated for a number of years. I don't know just how many, but they had a full-time couple of different pastors there. Bryce Morgan was one of them, and George Flynn was one of them. That was another preacher that was here that
And
lived
there
here.
was a preacher that come from Travelers Rest every Sunday afternoon and preached for a while.
Yeah.
Now, you said did you grow up going to the Mountain Page Church, the new Mountain Page Church?
I grew up going most of the there, yes.
And then you said you started going to First Baptist later.
Later on, yes.
When was the new church, First Baptist Church, built? Was that in the 60s?
Charlene can probably tell you when it was built.
First Baptist Church, was it built in the 60s? The new First
No, it was built in the late 50s,
Late
about
50s?
57.
So did you go to church in the old First?
No, I didn't go.
You weren't here.
I started going here about 85 when I started going to First Baptist here. And I joined the church there and been going there ever since.
What do you think about Saluda today? You've seen a lot of changes.
Seen a lot of changes, and some of them I'm not over proud of, but I still like Saluda, and we've still got a lot of people here, a lot of good people. And some of the new people come in want to change things, and some of them probably need changing. But some of the changes they may want to do, I'd say I probably wouldn't want to agree with.
You want to tell us what they might be?
Well, I won't go into detail on that because I don't want to offend nobody, and I ain't got nothing against nobody that's moved into Saluda here, but I may not agree with everything that some of them want to do. But,
Do you have any advice for the younger generation that lives here or moving into the area, younger folks?
well, it's just a good place to grow up, and back when I grew up, they wasn't as much trouble to get into. There was some trouble to get into, but now that drugs is available and all, that's the worst thing I felt like it's happened. When I grew up, there wasn't no drugs in Saluda.
A little bit of moonshine.
There was a little moonshine, but
Did you ever know, and you don't have to say who, but did you ever actually know people that did that to make money, moonshine?
I do. Yeah, I know a couple of people that lived over crossing the South Carolina line. But like I said, I wouldn't call no names that made moonshine and sold
Are
moonshine.
you talking about in the Dark Corner area?
Well, some of that area over there was called Dark Corner.
And that's was that Glassy Mountain area?
Yeah.
Now, what about in Saluda? Were there any moonshine dealers in Saluda?
They could have been, but if they were, I didn't know where any of them were, and I never heard nobody say there was one, right in. So the ones I knew was over across the line into South Carolina.
It's probably sold in Saluda.
Oh yeah.
Let me ask you this question about the black community. Do you remember Phoebe Sullivan?
I knew Phoebe Sullivan, didn't know her well. And there was a man by the name of Will Moore, an old colored man here. My daddy broke a steer for him to work. Back then, people plowed with steers, and later on they got mules and horses. But I remember my daddy breaking a steer to work for Will Moore. Perry Elijah was another good old colored man that lived over there. He worked on...
There, you're talking about over where Phoebe lived?
Over near Phoebe, going down that way. He was smart. He worked on sewing machines, and he'd fix old clocks and different stuff. My mother had a Singer sewing machine, and something broke on it. She used to sew for different people, make her women's dresses and stuff. Something broke on her sewing machine, so she ordered the part from Singer, and they sent her the wrong part. So she ordered it again, and they still sent her the wrong part. So she took the old part, got Perry Lights to look at the old part. It was broke, and he said, "I can make you that part." So he, I don't know what he made it out of, some kind of metal. He made a part, put it in there, and it worked just as good as a new one. And I thought that was real intelligent, him to be able to make a. And then after I got a car, I had an old Chevrolet car that had a clock in it, and the clock didn't run. I wanted the clock to run, so I asked him, I said, this old clock, it's not a wind-up clock, it runs off of the battery in the car. And he said, well, yeah, I'll take a look at it. So I took a clock out and took it to him. And a few days later, he said, I got your clock running. I said, well, how'd you test it? He said, I used flashlight batteries. But anyway, he said all he had to do was clean it. I put it back in there and it run as long as I kept the old car. So I was pleased with that.
Do you remember whether there was a restaurant in the bottom of Phoebe's house?
I heard about them serving food over there, but I never did know where it was at in there.
Do you remember very much about the black community over at near the St. Matthew's Church?
I just knew they had services over there, and that's all I knew about it.
Did you know Ada Means or Isaac Means?
I knew of them. I don't know. I've probably seen them, but as far as saying I personally know them, I couldn't say. I knew Walt Parks. That was another colored man here in Saluda. But Wilmore, Miss Phoebe, Walt Parks, and
did you ever see this?
Did you know the Irwins?
the Owens.
Urban, like named after the road up here.
You remember Snowball?
I seen Snowball a time or two. I knew him when I seen him. But that's in Perry Light. That's about all the colored folks I actually knew.
Okay. Jumping around, one more character I want to ask you about. Did you know Billy Morris with the Century Old Fire? Did you ever meet him?
I didn't ever meet him, but I heard of him all my life. It kept the old fire going. I never did meet him, but
to the holler and meet him?
But I never did actually talk to him.
Okay.
That was a long way from home, wasn't it?
Yeah. And when we grew up, we didn't have a car. In fact, me and my brother had a car before my daddy made enough money to buy him a little old truck. Me and my brother drove around, and finally he got enough money to buy him I reckon he had to spend what little money he made to raise 7 kids.
I guess so.
But anyway, he learned to drive and got a vehicle after me and my brother had a vehicle and started driving.
Your mom worked in the mill for a long time too, didn't she?
She worked in Green River Mills over in Tuxedo. She worked second shift. And Horace Pace, your brother-in-law, she rode with him. He worked over there. And
And your sister?
my sister Elsie worked over there a little while.
Before she married.
Yeah, before she was married. But that was a place that there was a few others from Saluda worked over there. But my mom and one of my sisters did work over there a while. But at night, I'd help my sister cook breakfast in the morning because my mom working second shift, she didn't get up early. My dad always got up early. I learned to make biscuits. I could cook biscuits. And we'd have eggs and bacon and grits usually for breakfast. And my mom would fix us a good dinner. At night, we'd a lot of times just have milk and bread and maybe something that's left over from dinner. But we had enough to eat. I never did go hungry. We didn't have no fancy food, but we had enough to eat. And we raised our own chickens for eggs, and we eat chickens, and we raised our own hogs for meat. Had a milk cow, had our own milk cow. My job was milking the milk cow. When my brother was older, it was his job. When I got a little older, I wanted to learn to milk. And he didn't want to fool with me. He wanted to get through milking and go on and do whatever he wanted to do. But one day he said, I'm going to let you learn to milk, teach you how to milk. And said, now when you learn, it's going to be your job. Well, I learned to milk, and sure enough, it was my job. And I didn't enjoy it as much then when I knowed I had to do it. But I did it for a number of years.
Didn't most everybody around here have their own cow for milk?
Most people lived out in the country, had their own cows and chickens, and most of them had their own hog stuff. So
now, where were you living when you were growing up?
Lived on Mountain Page Road, right where you turn in to go to Old Mountain Page Road. We moved there when I was 11 years old. Before then, my dad and mom had rented houses and moved around different places. My dad and mom started buying this house for my great uncle. And my oldest sister, when she graduated from school, she went to Arlington, Virginia, and worked for the government there for a number of years. And she helped them get enough money to start buying that house. My great uncle, and I was 11 years old when we moved out there. We had a place for a garden and, you know, a barn and place for the hogs. So,
Pretty out there.
so, and that's the first house we lived in that had electricity. The houses before then, we used lanterns and oil lamps, flashlights.
So what year was that you got electricity?
See, I was born in 31. I was 11 when we moved out there, so it'd been 42. And we got our first TV probably about 1950. We had a radio before then, and I used to love to listen to Lum and Abner. That was one of my favorite programs. I'd have to hurry and get through milking in time to get up to the house to listen to Lum and Abner. That was just an old program I liked.
And you talked about your mother and your sister working in the mill. There was not any industry in Saluda at that time.
No, there wasn't. No, there wasn't.
You went out to get a job.
Yeah. My brother, he quit school, I think, about the 11th grade and joined the Navy. And when he got out of service sometime later, he come back and went to school and got his, you know, finished school, but under the GI thing. Anyway, that was about the story of mine, I guess.
Is there anything that you would like to see different in Saluda?
I can't particularly name any one thing. I know every town and city, you know, changes as years go by. I like to see some of it stay, you know, here like it was as I grew up as a memory, you know, but I realize that some changes are necessary and things are gonna change, but I like to see some of it still stay original.
And I guess we're fortunate that so much of Saluda has stayed original.
I'm glad and thankful that some of it has, and I'm glad to see the Thompson store still running, and Glen Morgan got the M.A. Pace store and the place down there, so it just makes you feel good to see the local business still going.
Is Leon some kin to you?
Leon's daddy and my daddy were first cousins, so whatever that makes me and Leon, second or third, probably third cousin, because him and my daddy would probably be second cousins. And anyway, yeah, me and Leon are probably about third cousins.
Well, there was a time when Saluda was a dry town. That's not.
Oh yeah.
It's not anymore.
No, about every business now you go in is things you can get beer and wine, and I'm not altogether in favor of that, but anyway, that's the way it is.
We even got a brewing company.
Yeah, right.
But that's everywhere you go.
But anywhere you go, you got a choice. You can partake in it or you can not partake in it. And when I was young, I used to drink some, not that I'm proud of it. But I learned a good many years later, especially after my son was born, I was drinking a little bit up to then. But I decided it was time for me to grow up and be a dad and be a man. I didn't want to raise my son in front of stuff like that. And I'm glad I didn't. And when my son was 9 years old, he told me one time, he says, "Dad, there's 3 things I'm not going to ever do." And I said, "What's that, son?" He said, "Smoke, drink, or do drugs." And I remember telling him, I said, "If you'll stick with that, you'll always be proud you did." And he's married and got 2 kids now, and he's 44 years old, and he's stuck with that, and I'm proud of him for that.
Where does he live?
He lives in Concord, right out of Charlotte. His wife teaches school, and he had a job at this place for about 15 years. They done graphics and advertising and stuff. It was just a small outfit, and when he started, there was about 8 employees, but it finally got down to just him and the boss, and he lost his job there about a little over a month ago, and he's got a job now that it'll go through the summer cleaning pools and doing stuff like that. But he's looking for another job because this fall he won't have a job. There won't be enough that kind of work.
And where's the daughter?
She's in New Jersey. Her husband, he's got his own business. He goes around selling these little like 7-Eleven stores and different stores. He's got a warehouse there in his basement, and he's got another warehouse where he keeps aspirins and a lot of different stuff that these 7-Eleven stores, some of them ain't 7-Eleven, but well, like a Triangle and different stores, you know, that have little stuff to sell. So he sells to them, and her daughter stays home.
What's your daughter's name?
Maria.
Maria.
Mm-hmm.
Well, does anybody have any other questions?
What's your fondest memory of Saluda?
Well, I just appreciate growing up here and knowing how I grew up, and growing up poor. I'm still poor, but growing up poor and not having anything. But as you grow up and have a few things and get where you can have a car and a home, it means something to you. So.
You probably didn't feel like you were growing up poor though at the time, did you?
No, not really. But anyway, I'm glad I grew up in Saluda and know how things was growing up here. It's just a good memory.
Well, we appreciate you letting us interview you today and telling us all your good stories.
Well, I might not have had a whole lot to tell you, but told you what little I knew.